my first book came out in 2001, which means that there are adult readers now who like were not even born and can't really remember like the bad old days where fat characters were comic relief or they were on their way to being thin characters. They were the before and after ads. And that to me, like that is encouraging. That makes me happy. So yes, I mean, I do hear from people, thank you for writing this book. I really needed it. I've been reading your work ever since then. I read your book when I was in junior high and I probably was too young, but it really made a difference. Like I love hearing from those people, but I also love that there are just like this generation of women walking around that like don't even understand that it was a challenge to get this thing published back in the day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to GBH's Beyond the Page with Jennifer Weiner. I'm Jeremy Siegel from the GBH newsroom and our international program, The World, and I am so excited to be here to host tonight's Beyond the Page. Hi, Jennifer. Jennifer is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 22 books, including Good in Bed, Mrs. Everything, The Breakaway, and In Her Shoes, which was also made into a major motion picture. Her newest novel, The Griffin Sisters Greatest Hits, was released on April 8th, 2025, so it's just come out. Without further ado, please welcome to Beyond the Page, Jennifer Weiner. Jennifer, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I hopefully I've managed to unmute and I'm on screen and everything's good and my lights won't turn off in the middle of this.
You have one thing that I don't. You are here, we can hear you, and everything is sounding great. I'm really excited to chat with you. I love the Griffin Sisters' Greatest Hits. It's a novel about music, family secrets, and uncovering the past. And it centers on three people, a pair of sisters, Zoe and Cassie, who make it big in the early 2000s in the music industry, and Zoe's daughter, Cherry, who is young and in the near present day wants to make it big herself. I want to talk about all of those things: music, family secrets, the past. But I wanted to start with music. What made you want to write about music?
So I am a longtime music fan and a terrible musician myself. I started taking piano lessons again after what I've been describing as a 35-year hiatus. I studied piano as a kid, went back to it as an adult. I'm lousy. I'm so bad. And I'm just so impressed with anybody who can make music, whether you can sing or just sit down at a piano and play something, and just the economy of the storytelling, like being able to do sort of a novel's worth of work in a 4-minute song that has a great beat that you can dance to. There's just something that really impresses me about that. And then, of course, the demands of that kind of fame and creative life. I mean, I can tell stories, but like nobody is stopping me in the supermarket unless I've like just had my hair done. Like I'm not getting recognized. I'm not having people, stand outside my door or bother me or care a lot about my love life and write about me in the tabloids. And musicians, of course, have to deal with all of that. And female musicians get subject to a special level of scrutiny. And I wanted to talk about all of those things. So here we are.
You wrote a great piece in the New York Times, I think late last year, that was all about the difficulties of being a pop star and how it's almost impossible to thrust somebody like so intensely into the spotlight and make them a megastar in a healthy way, how it's just a toxic industry in a lot of ways. I'm curious about like, I mean, so much of this takes place in the early 2000s, and that's a very specific, great music period, but problematic in its own ways. What were you thinking about sort of in the real world, both contemporary and in the past, like music and figure wise, as you were putting together these characters?
Um, it was so interesting because I had finished the draft of the Griffin sisters when Liam Payne of One Direction died and when Justin Timberlake got pulled over for that DUI, and everybody was sort of taking a really hard look at his legacy and the Britney of it all.
Mhm.
Um, I would love to tell you that I wrote about the early aughts, the late 90s and the early aughts, because it was a particularly terrible time that we have moved past. And now it's so much better and we're so much more enlightened and we're not feeding our child stars into this sausage grinder of fame and then being surprised when they don't thrive. I would love to say that things have gotten better, but I really do not think that they have. And that as a consumer of the music, as a consumer of the narrative, as a mom, I mean, all of it just is it's upsetting in all kinds of ways. And I can look back and point at like so many specific incidents, like Carney Wilson being interviewed on Howard Stern in the late 90s, and Carney was, not even all that plus size, but she was treated like her body was like an affront. And Jessica Simpson showing up in the mom jeans after she had played Daisy Duke in the Dukes of Hazzard movie. And again, people acting like she had done something really, really harmful by like gaining 10 pounds. And, the focus on Britney's mental health and her romantic life and the quickie marriage and the reality TV shows and all of that, all of the stuff around the music, I guess. I was just, really, really interested in revisiting it, reconsidering it, asking questions about what's changed and what still has to change.
Was it difficult putting yourself in the shoes of the characters for this? I mean, obviously you have your own experience with fame and the difficulty of it, but you said, you're not stopped in the supermarket. You don't have the constant like influx of photographers and fans like trailing behind you all the time. Obviously you've written, about tons of different characters, but not being at least super musical yourself by your own admission. Was it difficult to get into the mindset of people who are professional musicians?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, creativity is creativity, right? Like writing a song, writing a poem, writing a short story, writing a novel, like there's things in common, but there's also things that are very different, such as the performing aspect of it. So I had to do a lot of, I mean, I read, I think, just about every female rock star's memoir that's come out in the last 25 years. And I have friends in the business, friends who are singer-songwriters, friends who work for record labels. So I talked to all of them. I watched all kinds of documentaries. Went back and watched. I've been saying so many episodes of Total Request Live on YouTube that I think like my tips frosted themselves at some point. Like I just immersed myself in that world, and and writing fiction is about imagination and empathy and just sort of thinking like, how would it feel? Like, how would it feel if I was like Cassie and I just wanted to make music and sort of ended up thrust into this band, accidentally famous, in love, even though I'd never planned on being in love, and just trying to navigate all of that. And then how would I feel if I were Zoe and just wanted so, so desperately to like be the famous girl, be the one on top, knowing that my talent wasn't enough to put me there.
Hmm. We're going to try to keep the conversation mostly spoiler free for people who are watching and may not have had a chance to read the book yet. I wanted to ask like about your body of work in general. You've written so many books, so many successful books. I know for a decade before getting into novels, you also were a journalist. Everybody has their own workflow, and I'm always fascinated doing interviews like this to hear how different authors work. How do you write this many books? How do you successfully complete a 20-second book?
I don't get out much,
Do you
is the
really
short
not?
answer. I don't have much of a social life, but I mean, I always so, like you said, I was a newspaper reporter for almost 10 years before my first book was published, which I think gave me like a real work ethic and a real, almost like physical training, like a Pavlovian association. Like, if you are sitting at a desk and there's a laptop in front of you, like, you better be writing
Mhm.
something. Um, part of it is the journalism. Part of it is I love writing. Like I'm not one of these like, oh, every word is agony. I sit at my computer and open a vein. Like I really love writing and it's probably the only thing I'm good at, professionally speaking. I can do some other things decently, but and then like as a mom, I outsourced just about everything I could, including a lot of the housework and childcare. I had when my mom was alive, she was around and helping me take care of my daughters a lot. I had nannies, babysitters, all of the things. Like, I honestly think that behind every successful woman, if she's lucky, and I am lucky, she has a supportive spouse. And then there's probably some kind of like support staff infrastructure around her helping her kind of keep all those balls in the air. So that's how I do it.
You mentioned both your mom and being a mother yourself, and reading your book, I was struck by like how much of the parental element of it rung really true. I have a very young daughter at home right now, and you write about some of the difficulties of parenthood, the fears of having another child, and so much of this book also centers on family secrets. Does any of that desire to write about that come from your own experience? I mean, I know every family has secrets, but what made you want to delve into, what we hide and what we know and what we don't, and the family members we know and don't?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm always interested in ambivalence, right? Maternal ambivalence, marital ambivalence. My own family story and people who've read some of my novels or my essay collection Hungry Heart, like they know this whole deal. But like my mom and dad were married for like 15 years. They had four children. They got divorced in a very acrimonious way in the 80s. This was not a modern conscious uncoupling. This was sort of a scorched earth, my dad just deciding he was done being a husband and done being a father, and that was it. And then 10 years after that, my mom fell in love with a woman. And my siblings and I, who were teenagers and 20 somethings at the time, were, and this was the 90s, it was not as enlightened. And we were just sort of like, what is going on here? And for me, as a novelist, I was like, well, what was the story of your marriage? Did you love dad? Were you interested in men? Or was this sort of, if you wanted kids, this was the only way to do it? So, like, what was that like, And my mom, of course, quite understandably did not want to talk about this a lot with us, which led me to sort of form my own conclusions. So I think that that's part of my personal interest in questions of secrets or ambivalence or like what the true story is, even though, and this is something my mom used to say a lot, like you never know what's going on in someone else's marriage. Like the only people who know that are the people who are in it. So that's part of it. And then like the maternal piece, like as you referenced, there's a mom in the Griffin sisters who is very, very happy and content with her one daughter and discovers that she's pregnant again and very much does not want to be. And it's too late for her to do anything about this. And so she ends up with a baby she doesn't want and a really difficult baby. And I do not think we talk enough, either in fiction or in nonfiction or in social media, any of the places, about how hard parenting can be and how it rarely looks like it does in the Hallmark aisle of the drugstore. Like it is grueling, endless, monotonous, demanding, thankless work. And I think that women for a long, long time felt like they could not say that. And if they were struggling, there was something wrong with them. And, I think if I have any legacy from my life as an author, like just the idea that like, yeah, this is really, really hard. And it's not you, it's motherhood and it's babies and it's tiny little people who can't tell you what they want. It's not easy.
Throughout your career, you've kind of been outspoken against the hallmark of it all, for lack of a better word. You've received praise for not just having women at the center of your novels, but fully realized women who are plus size generally don't fit the prototype of female protagonists. I'm curious, looking back on your body of work and when you began writing novels, how intentional has it been? Like, I want to write about something or write in a way about something that you don't often hear. How much of it is this is just what naturally comes out of you as a human and as a writer?
So I do think that it's both. But I think with my very first book, there was really a sense of like, I'm writing a book that I need to read. Like, and in the 90s, there really were not a lot of plus size protagonists anywhere in the media, not in movies, not on TV. We had Fat Monica on Friends, and that was about as close to plus size representation as we got. And even in books where it shouldn't have been such a problem, there were funny fat best friends, and there were fat characters who had like a weight loss plot, right? Where they would lose a lot of weight and then the good stuff would happen to them. And when I was a young woman, when I was in my teens, when I was in my 20s, like I really needed a story where there was a protagonist who looked like me, who felt like me, who had, the dysfunctional family and the dad who'd abandoned the family and, the body that sort of didn't fit the paradigm of what women were supposed to look like. And that girl got a happy ending. And I could not find that book in the library, and I know I looked for it, so I wrote it. And my publisher, I had a hard time finding an agent at first because there was a lot of institutional resistance to the idea of like this character is fat and she stays fat. She doesn't get thin. She stays fat and still gets the guy. And I had some trouble finding an agent, but once I did, my publisher was like, they were really convinced that there was an audience for this story, and I was not convinced. Like, I was like, well, it's nice that you guys are paying me all this money, but like, I really, really believed that Good in Bed was going to sell like 12 copies, and like, I would be related to six of the people who bought it, and I would know the other six from Weight Watchers, and like, that would be that. And it would be a typical first novel. Like it wouldn't do very well. No one would ever hear from me again. I hadn't quit my day job, so I figured I would just go back to being a reporter.
You hear from other authors now? I mean, it's been a while since you were first published. Do you hear from people who, because the industry's changed a lot and a lot of that has been because of you. Do you hear from newer authors or people who were inspired by your work?
Yeah, I mean, and really the most encouraging thing is that no one thinks it's weird anymore. Like there are plus size characters in romance now, there are plus size characters in romantasy. It's just seen as a much more acceptable, normal thing. And my first book came out in 2001, which means that there are adult readers now who like were not even born and can't really remember like the bad old days where fat characters were comic relief or they were on their way to being thin characters. They were the before and after ads. And that to me, like that is encouraging. That makes me happy. So yes, I mean, I do hear from people, thank you for writing this book. I really needed it. I've been reading your work ever since then. I read your book when I was in junior high and I probably was too young, but it really made a difference. Like I love hearing from those people, but I also love that there are just like this generation of women walking around that like don't even understand that it was a challenge to get this thing published back in the day.
I did want to raise something that one listener, Jacqueline, wrote in with saying, I have two words for you, Jonathan Franzen. We keep hearing that women
Oh
authors
no.
be taken as seriously as their brothers. I'm not buying it. Is our culture afraid of women, even in prose? And for anybody, watching about a decade ago, you, Jennifer, were at the center of a media frenzy involving Jonathan Franzen. I don't think it's worth rehashing totally, but to oversimplify, he criticized your work and accused you of freeloading off of gender bias in the literary canon. It's worth pointing out he had not read your work and said that. but still blasted the idea of genre fiction and said your work kind of lacked merit. Obviously there's so much more representation now, but at the same time, like chick lit is referred to as a genre of fiction all the time. Do you feel like genre boxes in novels and audiences and that there shouldn't be sort of this genre? Like, is our culture, as Jacqueline asked, afraid of women in prose?
Well, so there's two things going on. And one of them is readers who just read. Like, I don't think any of my readers cared necessarily what my books were called, how they were shelved, what the covers looked like. Like, once they understood sort of what I was doing and what they were going to get when they picked up one of my books, like, I don't think it bumped them in the least that they were called chick lit or beach reads or women's fiction or, insert derogatory term du jour. Um, but then there's marketing. Then there's people working in bookstores who have to shelve things somewhere and have to display them somehow. And I think that having categories it's a very human instinct and it's a useful one when you're trying to sell stuff. Um, but I'm also very aware that like books like mine, books like Jodi Picoult's, she was another one of the people who was speaking out about the Jonathan Franzen of it all. Which started, by the way, I did not just like wade into this randomly. When Oprah selected one of his books for her book club, he decided he did not want to be part of her book club because he felt like her picks were schmaltzy and one-dimensional, and that her housewife viewers would not have the intellectual wherewithal to comprehend his work. And which I thought was just a really crummy thing to say out loud with your whole chest. And it's he's certainly wherever he is now, he's welcome to have whatever opinion of my books he wants. But I think anyone paying attention has to acknowledge that women's books are still treated differently than books by men. And if you don't believe me, go into a bookstore, ask them where the women's fiction is. They will point it out and then say, and where do you keep your men's fiction? And they will stare at you because there is no men's fiction, because that's just fiction. Like that's still the default. And women are still this special other category. And, and I still feel some kind of way about that.
Are there authors, especially looking back on the literary canon, who women authors who, I mean, weren't just influences, but people who you saw who did break through all of the barriers that are still in a lot of ways there, who have like stuck with you?
Um, that's interesting because like when I think about who I was reading, it really
Hmm.
was a lot of what would be considered genre fiction. Like
Hmm.
Susan Isaacs was who I
Hmm.
wanted to be when I grew up because she wrote really smart, really relevant, really funny books with Jewish protagonists, and some of them were like sort of detective stories and some of them were like historical and more of romance and some of them were contemporary fiction set in the here and now, but they were all just like they were funny, they were well researched, they were well written, and to me, like she's the gold standard. So but I think of somebody like Sally Rooney now, who like back in the day, like if she published her first book 25 years ago, like I could easily imagine it with like the pink cover with like the high heel and the martini glass. And now it's like she's published in a much more serious way, which I would like to believe that all of us who were making noise about the categorization and the way the books were covered, the way the books were packaged, who was getting reviewed, who wasn't, who was writing reviews, who wasn't. I'd like to think that we changed some of that and that, we walked so that the Sally Rooneys of the world and the women who will come after them can run.
Hmm. I did want to ask, like, do you feel like your work, sometimes because of that categorization, isn't taken as seriously as it should? Like, sort of getting back to genre, I feel like there are benefits, but there are also drawbacks of it, where there's really, really great genre work that works so well because it is of a genre. But do you ever resent that?
Eh, I mean, it's all I can do is write the best books that I can and hope that people find them and hope that they take something from them. If I let myself get too worried about like how they're classified, how they're categorized, whether Jonathan Franzen thinks I'm a good feminist or not, like it wouldn't be good for either my mental health or my workflow. So I just have to really I do my best. I write the very best books I can, and then I just sort of leave it to the world to make its determination and, just try to sort of argue the more global case about women's work broadly and not Jennifer Weiner and is she getting enough review and respect and attention and whatever. I that was Jonathan Franzen's other big critique, I think, is that it was always personal for me and it was just about getting attention for my books and attention for me. And it really wasn't. Although it's very interesting that that's sort of the worst thing you can say about a woman is that she just wants attention.
Betsy asked, "What authors do you like to read?"
I read everything. I read Ann Patchett and Tyler and Anne Lamott. I read Curtis Sittenfeld and Jodi Picoult and Ellen Hildebrand. I read KJ Charles and Rachel Reed. I like romance. I have read everything that Stephen King has ever written. Everything. I am a completist. Horror. I like. I mean, basically I'm an omnivore. Like you put it in front of me, I will read it. And I read fast and I read like all the time. Like I always, always, always have a book.
Do you even read when you're, smack in the middle of a big writing project?
Yeah, and I know that there are writers who don't read fiction when they're writing, but I would be so sad and so lost without fiction. Like I mean, I just have to really be careful that like I'm not reading something that is so impressive and accomplished that it just like makes me feel like I will never achieve anything close to that level of greatness and then I just end up in a tailspin. So, but I read a lot, a lot, a lot.
We have a number of questions about for first getting published, a bunch of them that were pre-submitted. And one attendee asked in the chat, can you share your publishing journey from the beginning with finding an agent to the book contract, how it all went?
Yes. Okay. So I love telling this story because it makes me feel like I'm a million years old because this is all pre-internet. So our story begins back in the 90s. I get dumped. This guy breaks my heart. I am completely bereft and I'm driving around crying and singing My Heart Will Go On because Titanic is out. And my friends decide they can't listen to me like talk about this anymore. They're like, please do something. And so I'm thinking, like, what do I know how to do? And the answer is I know how to tell a story. Like I'd been an English major in college. I'd been a reader my entire life. I'd been a newspaper reporter and I'd published short stories and I was always writing something. So I write this book that becomes good in bed. And I very arrogantly assumed that there would be many people interested in representing me when I went to look for an agent. I'd gone to Princeton, I'd studied with Toni Morrison, and I just thought that like they'd be lining up, and they were, but they were lining up to tell me no. So I sent out 25 query letters. I got 24 rejections. I had one agent who did want to work with me, but did not like the fact that Candy Shapiro, who is the heroine of Good in Bed, was plus size and said, like, I won't be able to sell the film rights because nobody wants to see a movie about like a sad, lonely fat girl. And I was thinking, like, film rights. Like, I did not think we were talking about film rights. I
Mhm.
just want this to be a book. And also, if I make her, I mean, the agent's suggestion was like, if I wanted to give her a weight problem, I should make her like 10 pounds overweight. And I decided if I did that, then basically I had written Bridget Jones with a bat mitzvah, and I didn't want to do that. So I found another agent who was on board with Canny, and we worked on the book together. I think the first draft was like 500 pages long, which is too long, but I didn't know that because there was no internet and like I couldn't check guidelines and stuff. So like I didn't know what I was doing. So we fixed the book, we sent it out. It sold at auction. There were a number of publishers who wanted to publish it. Sold it to an imprint of Simon and Schuster, two-book deal. I wanted to sell a book before I turned 30, and I missed it by 6 weeks. And that is
6 weeks.
my story. Yes, I still feel bad. Yes, and I will also share that they say that the happiest day of a writer's life is when you get to go home and tell your parents that someone's publishing your novel. And I think that this is probably true of everyone whose novel isn't called Good in Bed. It was not true for me. Fran was not happy.
Did you ever, when you were going through that process and you were getting pushback and being asked to make these changes, did you ever consider budging?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Because the agent who told me that about Canny and the film thing and nobody wanting to see that movie, like she was a very big deal. Like she was a very prominent agent. She had a lot of big name clients, and I believed that she would not have said this to me unless she really believed it. So I did, and I look back and it's like, I don't know how I had the chutzpah really to like stick to my guns because the easiest thing to do would have been to just like do what she told me. But like I said earlier, Good in Bed was a book that I was writing for myself. Like I was my own first reader, and I was writing this book to sort of get myself out of this misery. So if I changed it, it wasn't going to be the book that I needed. And I just had to like hope other people were going to need it too.
We have another question from the audience asking, when did you know you wanted to be a writer?
I think as soon as I realized that authors were living people who walked among us, like as soon as I figured out that this was a job I could have, it was the only thing that I wanted to do. And
Oh.
so, like I said, I was a reader my whole life. I go to college, I'm an English major. I graduated in 1991 and realized at that point that like no one is hiring debut novelists. Like no one is going to pay you to write your first novel. And I went to my parents and I asked them if either one of them was interested in being a patron of the arts and supporting me for several years, and they were not. So I got a job at a newspaper because that's a job that was going to pay me to write. And I learned a lot. And for many, many years, when people would ask me what advice I had for aspiring writers, I would say, go find a newspaper job. But now I feel like I can't really say that anymore because there aren't that many newspaper jobs. But
Yeah, it's wild. It's wild to think that you did that for like a steady monetary
right. I
income.
see, and this is why I feel so old. I feel like I'm telling people, yeah, I did scrimshaw. I made corsets, it's like the lost world, right?
You still do write a lot for the New York Times and other publications. What is it about, writing nonfiction, writing features, writing your perspective in a way that isn't a novel that still keeps you coming back to doing that?
It's a lot more timely, for one thing. Like, you can't really write off the news if you're writing fiction because your novel probably isn't coming out for another year, at which point no one's going to care about or even remember, perhaps, the thing that you're so worked up about. So, like, nonfiction is a way to be timely, it's a way to sort of be part of a conversation that fiction doesn't always allow for. And I sort of do them as a tribute to my mom because she was always like, she would say, I like your novels, but I really like your op-eds.
Mm.
And I sort of never knew what to do with that. It was like, thanks, I think. But, every time I write one, it's like little shout out to Fran.
I want to go back to the Griffin sisters. I don't want to give too much away, but we do have one person who wrote in to ask, which is a little spark of a spoiler here. Did you travel to Alaska to
Yes,
research for
yes,
this book?
yes. Okay, so part of the story is set in Alaska. I think we can say that
Mm.
without spoiling too much. Yes. So 3 summers ago, my husband and I went to Alaska because I had always wanted to go, and I felt with climate change, it was becoming more urgent, and we needed to go before it just was like a puddle. And I loved it, and it's incredibly beautiful, and it's like no place I've ever been. But the people there, a lot of them seem to, I don't want to say be on the run from something, but I did overhear a number of conversations, novelists eavesdrop. It's like a professional, it's a skill set, part of the job. And I would hear people talking, and a lot of them seem to have left some previous version of themselves behind. Like Alaska was their 2.0 kind
Mm.
of thing. So I wanted to set part of the book there, because it felt very real to me that one of the characters who's tried to go off the grid and just get herself as far away from humanity as possible, that's where she'd end up.
Is there ever any fear, like when you're influenced by real life experiences like that, from what you're hearing from other people, that you could get it wrong? Like, I'm just imagining going to Alaska and hearing that. I would never have the confidence to include that in a book. You know what I mean? Like, do you feel like your
Uh-huh.
confidence has increased over the years of, being confident that you can create fully realized characters that are influenced by things you're exposed to in everyday life, but aren't your own life?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly try to do my homework.
Hmm.
And if I'm writing an experience that's like really, really different from my own, like I'll try to have somebody who has lived that experience take a look. Just, I mean, because the thing about fiction, like there's no absolute right or wrong. I mean, you can get things wrong, and I'm sure I have over the years, but like when you're writing characters, it's a lot of, does this feel true and real to this specific person? And is there something I'm not considering, or is there something I should include or think more about? Like when I'm writing about cultures that aren't my own, or like racial identities, like I'm always thinking about like what holidays are people celebrating? What foods are they eating? What games are they playing? Like what do things sound like in their house when there's a party going on?
Mm.
And if I don't know the answer, I try to find someone who can tell me. And I think, sensitivity readers get a really bad rap. And I think that there's a lot of flattening that happens in that conversation where it's like, oh, are we telling people they only can write their own lived experience? And I don't think anyone who writes fiction would say that. But I think that what they would say, what I would say is that the bar you have to clear gets higher when you are writing from a perspective not your own, especially if you're writing about a group that's been oppressed in any way, whether it's Black people, gay people, trans people. I would really, if I am writing one of those, a character who has that lived experience, I always want to check in with somebody and just make sure I haven't gotten it like horribly, horribly wrong.
Mm. How do you decide how much of your own experience to put in? Like in this book, characters are Jewish. You mentioned in your first book it almost being Bridget Jones with the bat mitzvah.
Right.
Like, were you very religious growing up, and how do you decide how much of that or other parts of your life to put into your books?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the old chestnut is write what you know.
Mm.
And so I think it's always easy for me to default to the female character who grew up when I grew up and who was the same level of observant that I was. I mean, I grew up in a fairly Jewish household. We lit the candles at Shabbat and went to services, and I was bat mitzvahed, I was confirmed, I went to Israel, did all of that. So that's an easy place to go for me. In terms of how much of my own experience, I mean, it's really interesting. Like going back to my first book, I remember like there was something really awful that my dad had said to me, or something terrible that he'd done, and I like put it in the book, and my editor like crossed it out, and she's like, this doesn't feel real. And I'm like, dude, it happened. It happened to me. It happened to me, and I want credit. for surviving this. And she was just like, yeah, no. Um, Things that are real don't always feel real on the page. And like whatever happened, like that's between you and your therapist, but it can't be between you and your readers. So I'm always asking, like, does it serve the story? Does it work for the character? Does it make sense within the context of the themes I'm working through, the story that I'm trying to tell?
That's fascinating. We have a great question from the chat here. Someone who wrote, I'm going to buy your book to support WGBH. Thank you for that. And because you signed it. And they ask, whose books do you want or have on your bookshelves because the author signed them?
Oh my gosh. So for my 40th birthday, my mom got me a copy of Susan Isaac's book, Almost Paradise, that she had Susan Isaacs sign.
Wow.
And so that's really special to me. And also, I've been in conversation with Hillary Clinton a couple of times. And so she has signed her books for me, um, which is really, really special. And I will cherish those forever, even though my kids make fun of me all the time.
Is it ever an odd moment as yourself an author asking another author to sign your book?
It's I once followed Stacey Abrams into a ladies' room. Like I'm such a like hopeless fangirl. I just it's ridiculous. I interviewed Judy Blume once, and like
Wow.
I don't know how many of you guys remember like Chris Farley when he was like pretending to interview the Beatles, and
Hmm.
he's like, you were the Beatles. That was cool. Like that was basically me. I'm like, you wrote Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. That's so cool. And she's looking at me like, is there a question here? And it can be hard to be professional because as I said, like I am a writer, but I am a reader first. So it's, trying to keep it together around the authors I admire, not always easy.
Hmm. It's interesting you bring up Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. That was recently made into a movie. You've had a book made into a movie, and we had one viewer who wrote in asking, what is the experience like having a book converted to a movie? How active of a role do you get to play or want to play, and what's that like as the person who made the novel a reality?
Yeah. Okay. So I think like every author you ask will use the word surreal at some point because it really is. It's like watching your work on a screen feels like somebody reached into your head and like scooped out a daydream and then found a way to broadcast it so everyone could see. I had a really, really positive experience with In Her Shoes being made into a movie. I was not involved at all, which was one of the rare mentally healthy decisions of my younger life where I was just like, I told the story that I wanted to tell on the page, like it's in bookstores, no one will ever be able to change a word of it. And I'm going to let the movie be the director's story and the screenwriter's story and the actor's story to tell. So I like stayed far away, except I did ask if my Nana could be an extra,
Oh,
which
really?
happened. That was super cool. I was the number one grandchild for like a hot minute. And then cousin Rachel had a baby, but it was great while it lasted. And I was really, really happy. I think they kept a lot of the stuff that made the book what it was. And, I thought the changes that they made, like I understood why they made them. It's sort of a sad story of the impossibility of getting like a plus size woman on the screen. When they cast Toni Collette, I was really, really happy because she had gained weight to play a part in a movie called Muriel's Wedding. So I'm like, oh, well, she'll just gain weight again. And they kept like giving me updates. They would call me and they'd be like, okay, she's gained 5 pounds. And I'm like, yeah, and then they're like, she's gained 10 pounds. And I'm like, all right, for some of us, that's a good weekend, but I respect the effort. And then they're like, okay, she's gained like 12 pounds, but she thinks she's hit a wall. And I remember being like, there's a wall. Like I was not told. Nobody told me there was a wall. But, they kept the Jewish aspect. They actually came and shot parts of the movie in Philadelphia. They didn't just go to Canada with like a styrofoam Liberty Bell, which a lot of, movies are shot there because it's less expensive. I was really happy. I was happy with it.
We have one person who wrote in response to you relearning piano. They said 50 years ago, I switched from playing piano to learning guitar. and stopped playing 8 years later. So here I am relearning how to play the guitar, and I'm finding that it's much more difficult than the first time I learned. I've taken lessons for a year now, and I'm just getting good at it again. Did you restart playing piano for your storyline? Was it because of the book that you were inspired to play?
No, this I started like 5 or 6 years before
Hmm.
I started writing the Griffin Sisters. I think I started because I read something about like how to stave off cognitive decline in middle age, and it said you can either learn a language or learn an instrument. And I was crap at languages in high school, and so I'm like, I always wanted to be like that person who could like sit down at a party and like play music on the piano. So 8 years later, I am still not that person, but I can play at recitals if I work really, 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 really hard.
Hmm. We have another question from Lisa who says, love your work. Can you speak about the separation of rom-coms from general fiction? It feels disrespectful to the very meaningful body of work you and other women authors have completed.
Oh boy. So rom-coms, that's a newer category.
Hmm.
I feel like it's like chick lit kind of shape shifts, and like some of it went off to be women's fiction and some of it went off to be rom-coms, which are different than romance, which is different than romantasy.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, it all does, like, you just go back to that question, like, where are these labels for books by men that mostly just get to be books, and they can have romance and they can have humor and they can deal with contemporary issues and family stuff and parenting and secrets and siblings and all that stuff. I mean, it's so hard, because if somebody's asking me what I'm reading and I tell them about the book, I'm not like, and it's literary fiction or and it's a
Hmm.
rom-com. I'm just like, it's this great book, and let me tell you all about it.
What are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now? I just reread Sigrid Nunez's The Friend
Mm.
because speaking of motion pictures, that's a movie now. And I read an old Meg Wolitzer book called The Wife that came out, I think, like 15 or 20 years ago, which is also about secrets and creativity. And I
Mm.
loved it. It was really, really good.
Do you watch a lot of stuff? Do you watch, I mean, you mentioned how much you read. It sounds like you're reading all the time. Do you watch movies? Do you watch TV?
Yeah. Big I White Lotus. I loved the White Lotus. I'm watching The Last of Us, which, oh my God, that last episode, total gut punch. Um, big fan of Call the Midwife. That's my comfort watch. And I stream it on PBS on WHYY here in Philadelphia. But it's like it feels like somebody giving you a hug and simultaneously like handing you a cup of like perfectly brewed, perfectly hot tea. It's about midwives in this in Poplar in the East End in London. It starts in the 50s and now we're in the 70s. Each season is a year. And you're following these midwives as they are tending to their patients and sort of living their own lives and having romances and conflicts. And there's nuns, and it's a whole thing. But if you have not watched Call the Midwife, 10 out of 10, highly recommend.
And you can watch it on WGBH. So when you're watching, say, Call the Midwife, or when you're reading Stephen King, when you're, taking in media, is it ever difficult to separate yourself as, a consumer and somebody being entertained, and as an author
Hmm.
and a creator of media yourself?
So I'm really lucky in that I've been able to like turn off that part of my brain and just read for pleasure still. Like, I think it would, I mean, yeah, sometimes I'll just be like, oh, that was a really beautiful sentence, or that was a really clumsy sentence, or the pacing feels a little off here. But mostly I'm just able to sort of read as a reader and view as a viewer and not always be thinking of, this could be better. This could be better, which I tell my daughters all the time because they never let me read their work. And I'm like, I'll just read it. I'm just a person. And they're like, you're not just a person.
So you haven't read any of your, do you get to read it after it's been a while, or you just not a first
Sometimes,
reader?
Sometimes I do. I mean, of course, the biggest wrangle I had was my older daughter's college essay. She
Mm,
did not want me reading that. And I'm like, but this is what I
yeah.
do. This is what I'm made for. And she's like, but it has to be me. It can't be you. And I'm like, fine. But it's a little bit heartbreaking. Both of my daughters are very funny and very talented writers, like very natural writers. They have a lot of voice. Neither one of them wants a thing to do with it. At least right now, they don't. But like my younger daughter wrote an article for her school paper where she ranked all of the staircases in her school on like metrics from like climbability to like social factors, like who are you going to see and
Mhm.
are you likely to run into your teachers? And like I thought that was so good. And I
That's
wish they let
amazing.
me read more.
We have another great question from the audience asking, how do you write books with multiple timelines, like the Griffin sisters? Do you write it chronologically as the reader would read it, or do you write each timeline first and then weave them together after the fact?
Um, there's a lot of outlining is the short answer. I write chronologically. I write how the reader is going to experience it, but there's always, always, always like a lot of rewriting and editing and like, oh, we need a scene here that does this, or oh, this scene here should be there. But generally, I'm you know, trying to sort of keep the two lines running at the same time in my head and thinking about like the pacing and what the reader is learning, when they're finding it out, how that's all happening. I know other writers do it differently, but that's how I do it.
We're getting towards the end and probably just have time for a couple more questions. And we have lots of folks asking about the publishing industry.
Yes.
And Marion wrote in to say, what are the obstacles you've had to face as an author in the publishing business? We talked a bit about it for your first book, but I'm curious now, having published so many, being so successful, do you still face, difficult moments and barriers?
I've been incredibly lucky. I mean, I I really, really have been fortunate to sort of have an audience that found me with my very first book that has stayed with me for almost 25 years. I've only had two publishers that whole time, which a lot of writers have many more, so I've been really lucky with my publishing partners. Um, the only thing I have to complain about, and it's really not even that big of a complaint. I mean, some of the covers I haven't loved. And there was a thing like in the aughts and like 2009, 2010, 2011, like I would write these plus size characters and then the covers would have thin women on
Mm,
them. And I would be like, can we please find me like a plus size person, like, or can we make this woman's arm like digitally bigger? Can we do something here? You know, publishers generally are very aware of like the aesthetics and like what's gonna move, what's gonna look good on a shelf. So they're not thinking the way I am necessarily, where representation is the most important thing. So like I would say like not loving some of the covers has been an issue, but like other than that, like I've been really, really lucky and I have not had many struggles in terms of like fighting with editors about they want it one way and I want it another way. Like most of the time I've been in agreement with the people who've been my editors.
mm.
So pretty fortunate.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to ask about any advice you might have for somebody who's pursuing a career as a novelist or just creatively or making a leap in general. We've had lots of people write in with questions about this. So what is the advice you'd offer for someone who's trying to write, trying to get published for the first time?
Well, the first thing I would say, and the first thing I do say to women especially, is like give yourself permission and start calling yourself a writer. Like, and take it seriously and make time to do it. Like, if that means hiring a babysitter, if that means letting someone else take care of the kids or do the dishes, do the laundry, like find a way to give yourself some time. I think the good news about these days, like there's been a lot of consolidation in the publishing world. But there are also many more platforms. Like anybody can start a Substack or start a blog or write long captions on Instagram. Like there are lots and lots of ways for you to get your work out there. And I really believe that if you're a writer, you are going to write. You're going to write whether or not you've got an agent, whether or not you have a book deal. Like if you have a story to tell, you are going to find a way to tell it. And beyond that, if you go to my website, which is jenniferweiner.com, there's about 25 pages about my publishing journey and advice I give to people and information about this fellowship that I'm doing for the first time ever this year with like up and coming women writers who I'm giving some money and some mentorship to. And hopefully we'll continue to do that in the future. So stop on by, take a look.
That's incredible. Well, Jennifer Weiner, we're going to have to leave it there. This has been a fantastic conversation. It was a real pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much.
This was so great. Thank you guys. Thank you everyone who watched. Thanks everyone who asked questions. And for those of you who are getting a copy, I hope you enjoy the book.
Thank you all so much again for joining, and I hope you have a wonderful night.